Brazil, which is the 8th largest country in the world, have just made a declaration that they're drafting a bill to adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve for their country. Now, this is actually followed by a similar declaration from another country, which is Morocco. We all know it's one of the largest African nation states. Now, they've made a similar declaration to adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. Morocco is a $369 billion economy. And also there's some other interesting news around a growing trend that we are seeing in companies who are following the MicroStrategy playbook, which is to release more debt in order to acquire more Bitcoin for their corporate treasuries. Now let's uncover what each of these pieces of news mean for us Bitcoin holders and why the newbie investors should certainly start taking heed into allocating some of their portfolios into Bitcoin as a matter of urgency more than ever before. Well, you can see in this article is super crystal clear, and you can see it's just a few days ago where they made this announcement. So it says the Brazilian lawmaker has proposed creating a Bitcoin sovereign strategic reserve, allocating up to 18.6 billion US dollars in order to diversify its international reserves. Now, this is actually key because we all know that Brazil is indeed the largest country in Latin America and the 8th largest country in the world. It's over 216 million people live in the country. So this is very, very significant. In addition to making this allocation into its national Bitcoin strategic reserve, it's also going to be rolling out educational programs and also blockchain research as key aspects of the initiative. So it's very interesting because up until now, the nation states have been really in rampant mode in making these declarations and drafting bills to allocate a proportionate amount of their sovereign wealth into Bitcoin. But in addition to that, we are seeing that Brazil is kind of accompanying that with educational programs to its citizens around blockchain, digital assets, Bitcoin, right? Just to bring the level of awareness about this global monetary asset, which is Bitcoin, to its population, which I find it very, very fascinating and interesting. So, I mean, this is fantastic, fantastic news. And of course, as we get more nation states adoption into Bitcoin, as well as the corporations that is growing and those high net worth individuals, and for the rest of us retail investors, this can only be great news for everyone in terms of, you know, appreciating the price of Bitcoin even higher. I also like to share the other news I made earlier on, which is, again, another example of economy, which is interesting because Morocco is a North African state and they are 369 billion US dollar economy. So this is not a small time country. This is quite large. Certainly it is one of the largest economies in Africa in the region. And they made a similar sort of declaration where they say they're going to legalize Bitcoin and crypto in general, says the central bank chief. Says that Morocco is certainly poised to lift its long-standing ban. This is interesting because Morocco originally have banned all cryptos in the country, but they are now waking to the fact that we need to reverse that trend, particularly since there are other competing economies who are actually investing into Bitcoin and legalizing and providing regulatory clarity and frameworks in the country as an investment vehicle in order to ramp up and increase their national wealth. Well, Morocco is actually woken up to the fact that, hey, we may need to reverse that ban trend that we've done. So it says here, very interestingly, despite the ban, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency usage has persisted underground, so in the black market, with an estimated 4.9% of the Moroccan population, approximately 1.9 million people, owning digital assets as of 2022. Now you can assume that there's much more intake of Moroccan population ever since then. So this is in line with the ethos. If you remember how Bitcoin came about, it wasn't something that's been driven from the elite or the establishment top down. It's more of a bottom up where it's the people that made Bitcoin a reality, and the statistics are clearly there, right? It's driven by the Moroccan population who have actually decided, well, hey, I don't care what the government, why they banned the digital assets and Bitcoin. I'm going to go ahead regardless and do what I think is right, which is investing in leading digital assets such as Bitcoin, which is precisely what the Moroccan population have done, which of course has forced the Moroccan elite to do a U-turn in its financial policy and indeed adopt Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies at large, making them legalized in the country. So this is fantastic news. So that's on the nation state front. So let's move on to the corporate side, which I find equally fascinating. So Metaplanet is one of the leading Japanese publicly registered companies. Now, they've actually followed MicroStrategy and adopted Bitcoin as standard. Now, they made a huge success, and as a result, they've following the MicroStrategy playbook, which is to raise even more capital through debt in order to buy more Bitcoin, which is what the headline actually make it crystal clear here. They say that Metaplanet is to raise $62 million for more Bitcoin, with a current stash at 1.1k of Bitcoin. So they actually say that as part of this debt capturing, they're going to use the majority of those debt funds raised, which will be strategically allocated for the purchase of additional Bitcoin. We have made it clear that we intend to utilize the debt and periodic stock issuance to systematically increase our Bitcoin holdings while reducing exposure to a depreciating yen. So this is really standard MicroStrategy playbook. They've realized quite quickly, ever since they made that decision to adopt Bitcoin as a corporate treasury reserve, to get rid of their fiat held currency, which in their case is yen, and to buy into Bitcoin. This is the actual continuing stance of Metaplanet. And you can see ever since then, what's the repercussion of that? Well, you can see that the stock price has actually skyrocketed. You can see when they first adopted Bitcoin standard in the corporate treasury reserve of the company. I think the declaration was made around April, May this year, early this year. And you can see that the repercussion of the stock price has skyrocketed for Metaplanet. Okay, there's some volatility, but you can see, as with any equity or any stock or any asset that is traded in the financial markets, there's always going to be that volatility up and down. But you can see unanimously there is that continuing uptrend in price, and I think Metaplanet is indeed the leader in its stock price appreciation. I mean that is a given. You can see it has actually skyrocketed year to date over 1,300% gain. Again, thanks to the courage of the Metaplanet board to have taken that decision to adopt Bitcoin as a corporate reserve asset, to move away from their depreciating yen into Bitcoin as a store of value, which is what this Bitcoin strategic reserve is all about. And I'm also going to go on to another example of another publicly registered company who've done a similar sort of thing as what MicroStrategy have done, what Metaplanet have done, which is in the case with Semler Scientific, who specialize in the provisioning or developing of technology solutions for healthcare providers. And they've done exactly the same thing. They've adopted Bitcoin standard at the beginning of this year. And they said that as of November 18th, the company have held just over 1.2k Bitcoins. And they've actually made total acquisition of 88.7 million. They went on to say that they've made an average purchase price of $69,000 per Bitcoin. Given that we are almost in the 100k, that is really... you can see how quickly they've appreciated. Semler Scientific have reported a Bitcoin yield of 18.9%. But ever since it is adopted or has made a decision to have adopted Bitcoin Treasury reserve asset in the second quarter of 2024 this year, the company has achieved a Bitcoin yield of 37.3%. Now, you name me any publicly registered company out there, whether it's in the US, I don't care which capital markets, this is unheard of, right? This is actually unheard of. And thanks again for allocating. I'm not saying you need to allocate all of your corporate treasury reserve, but a small proportion amount of your treasury reserve, you need to diversify, but you need to diversify intelligently into what is the most hardest asset, scarce asset you can find on the planet, which is Bitcoin. So this is what they've done. To raise capital, they're going to buy into more Bitcoin and keep it into their corporate treasury reserve, which is what Semler Scientific is doing at the moment. And the result is there. And here's another final chart that I find interesting, which is called Bitcoin Treasuries, right? It shows you, the type of entities, whether it's corporate publicly registered companies or nation states that made declarations of their Bitcoin holdings. So you can see MicroStrategy is the number one company out there with 386.7k of Bitcoin holders in its corporate treasury reserve. You got Marathon Digital, which is the leading Bitcoin mining company in the US also have a major chunk of its Bitcoin holdings in its reserve, almost 35,000 Bitcoins in total. But you have some other renowned household names like Tesla. You've got the Coinbase, which is the famous crypto exchange, Semler Scientific, which I just talked about. You also got Metaplanet, which I've just talked about from Japan. And as of today, which is November 30th, we have 94 publicly registered companies, global companies, who've made declarations about their Bitcoin holdings. This list is set to grow. And you've got private companies as well. And interestingly, governments, right? So this list is also changing. Funny enough, you've got Venezuela, who holds just under 250 Bitcoins in its national reserve. So this is very, very interesting chart, and it shows you, if you go at the bottom, you can see in tree map form that MicroStrategy is the number one leader public company with the largest Bitcoin holdings in its corporate treasury reserve. In terms of private companies, you've got Block.one. In terms of the ETFs, we all know about BlackRock, which is the iShares ETF, Bitcoin spot ETF, and you got followed by Fidelity, which is 195,000. So, it's interesting. And also from a government and national sovereign wealth, you got the US government, who have 208,000. Now, this is interesting because, as you probably came across, during the US presidential campaign, Trump has actually made a series of pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto pledges during his campaign, one of which is to acquire around 1 million Bitcoin once it's actually factored in Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset in the US Treasury. It currently has 208, but if you add 1 million, this would certainly make the US government or the US state the largest sovereign holder of Bitcoin in the world. You can see there's a handful of other countries that are going to be ramping up and start expediting their bills in their national parliaments to make Bitcoin a strategic reserve. You see it happening with Brazil. I just went through that today. You've seen it with Morocco. There's other countries around the world that are going to be in ramped up mode to start adding Bitcoin into this strategic reserve. I just want to leave with one final thought on this clip on Jan 3, which is Samsom Mao, on his predictions of Bitcoin in terms of its current state of nation state adoption. Let's listen to what he has to say, because he is one of the great Bitcoin maximalists out there whose remit through the Jan 3 company has set up are really just being the major advocates in spreading the word of Bitcoin with politicians around the world. So it's very interesting what he has to say. Let's just spend a few moments to hear what he has to say on this.
And the talk of creation of this Bitcoin strategic reserve in the US. So I think this is a catalyst for more change and more adoption of Bitcoin around the world, simply because most people are looking to follow somebody. They don't really want to be the first. El Salvador was the first nation state to really adopt Bitcoin in a meaningful way. But I think it's a small country, and they're not being looked at as the meter stick to measure and to decide what to do. Much in the same way as the ETFs. So the ETFs, the US kind of led the way there. Everyone was waiting for approval in the US before they greenlit their own ETFs. And you saw that with the US ETFs coming online, and then the Hong Kong ones, and then the Australian ones. They're very much watching and waiting. And I think it's the same for meaningful Bitcoin adoption, such as creation of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But there's already talk at the state level of a few states trying to create it before it's created at the federal level. And I believe this is also prompting more countries around the world to start really sitting down and trying to break down what they need to do and put together a plan. 2025 is going to be the year of the Omega candle and the year of 1 million Bitcoin.
So there you have it, really. Samson Mao making these kind of bullish case of his projections on Bitcoin, certainly into the next year, right? So he makes a declaration that there's going to be increasing a rate of countries adopting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. And also he made a prediction on the price of Bitcoin. Around the price of Bitcoin, we've got to be wary. It takes time. But if we see more countries adopting Bitcoin, more corporate institutional adoption of Bitcoin, if we see more ETFs inflows into the spot Bitcoin ETF, not just in US capital markets, but in other countries where they have ETFs already approved. And also the retail investors also continue to hold and make periodic accumulation of Bitcoins, whether it's through dollar cost averaging, pound cost averaging, euro cost averaging, or even yen cost averaging. It's really going to be inevitable that at some point we are going to see that God candle effect in the Bitcoin price appreciation. So I want to end with today's note. We need to continue to invest wisely, invest what you can in line with your risk appetite, and do the right thing and allocate part of your portfolio into Bitcoin, and more importantly, hold it into long term. I'm going to be holding it for the minimum 10 years. That's my goal, because I'm very, very confident I'm going to be rewarded quite significantly at the end of that 10 years. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to hit the like button, share this video, and more importantly, subscribe to this channel, as I put in an awful lot of effort to make these podcasts a reality. So until next time,